All right, everybody. Welcome and thank you to everyone who is joining us live for today's Lunch and Learn, PFAS in Brunswick, a community's fight for clean water. And thank you to all of you watching this recording. Brunswick Representative Dan Ankeles and Sarah Woodbury, who's the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy at Defend Our Health, know better than most of us how tragic an event like an AFFF spill can be. Sarah is our state's leading advocate on PFAS, and Representative Ankeles has been a champion for many of these bills, PFAS-related bills in the State House. Now he's seeing the repercussions of PFAS pollution taking place on his doorstep. If, for those of you like me who watched this Brunswick spill play out in the newspaper, but have a lot of questions about what's going on, you are in the right place. We are going to get a primer today on what happened and why and what it means for all of us. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kathleen Neal. I'm the Senior Director of Policy and Partnerships here at Maine Conservation Voters and Maine Conservation Alliance. Our organizations represent more than 13,000 members and supporters dedicated to building a just, thriving future for all by acting on the climate crisis, protecting the environment, and safeguarding our democracy. MCA does that by bringing people and organizations together to educate, inspire, and advocate, and MCV by advocating for equitable policies, holding elected officials accountable, and winning elections. Since 2020, this weekly online Lunch and Learn series has helped us advance all of those goals, creating a shared space to explore our environmental and social history, policy priorities, climate action movement, and more. A few notes before we dive into today's program. We'll hear from both of our speakers first and then take your questions in the Q&A session at the end. You don't have to wait, though. You can send your questions to me or to Maggie Summers through the chat whenever they occur to you, and we'll keep track of them and consolidate those with similar themes and make sure we can get to as many as possible following the presentation. We ask that you not message our speakers directly so they can keep their focus on the presentation, not the chat box. And if you have any technical difficulties, Maggie is the one to solve them for you. So just reach out to her through the chat. This event is being recorded and the video will be posted on our website later this afternoon. You can also find recordings of all of our programs on YouTube, where there are a bunch of different playlists to help you focus in on particular topics. We've done a number of programs on PFAS over the years because it is a serious challenge facing our state, so you can dig in there. And before we get the presentation going, today is actually our last Lunch and Learn of 2024. And as we round out yet another year of weekly programs with all of you, we just want to thank you for sharing this space for education, advocacy, and partnership. The Lunch and Learns and all of our climate, environmental, and democracy work at MCV and MCA happen through the generosity of members like you. As we approach the holidays and the season of giving back, we would be honored if you'd consider a gift to Maine Conservation Voters to help ensure that quality programming like this can continue in the weeks and months ahead. Thank you for being with us. Maggie and I often say that this is our favorite part of the week every week, and that is true because of each and every one of you. So thanks for being with us. And Sarah, I will turn things over to you to kick it off.
Thanks, Kathleen. I am going to share a PowerPoint, hopefully. We tested this beforehand, but you know how it goes. Maggie, are we good?
Yes,
Okay.
that's great.
Great. So just very briefly, as Kathleen said, my name is Sarah Woodbury. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for Defend Our Health. Defend Our Health is a Maine-based nonprofit that works to create a world where all people are thriving with equal access to safe food and drinking water, healthy homes, and products that are toxic-free and climate-friendly. Defend has been working on the PFAS issue here in Maine since around 2017 and has been the lead organization on pretty much every piece of PFAS legislation that has gone through the legislature. And we are grateful for the support and leadership of folks like Representative Ankeles, and also of our coalition partners like Maine Conservation Voters who help us do this work. Okay, now of course it's not moving forward. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to just very briefly set the stage and then turn it over to Representative Ankeles to dig a little bit more deeply into the PFAS issue or to the Brunswick issue. I know a lot of folks have heard about PFAS, but there might still be some people that are a little confused about what exactly it is, where we find it, how it's ending up in our environment and in our water. PFAS, or per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, are a class of fluorinated chemicals. It's the carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest in nature. So it makes PFAS what they call forever chemicals because of that strong bond. They stick around for a very long time. They stick in the human body for a very long time, in our environment for a very long time. They are used to make products grease-proof, stain-proof, water-resistant. In the case of AFFF, they also are very good fire suppressants. You can find them in your electronics, things like semiconductors and your TVs and that type of stuff because also of that kind of fire suppressant characteristic that they have. They are in everyday everyday products that we use: clothing, cookware, food packaging, makeup, dental floss, menstrual products. Anything that has anything in it that could possibly be grease-proof, stain-proof, or water-resistant probably has some form of PFAS in it. Okay. There we go. Okay, so most folks have some level of PFAS in their blood. More than 98% of people have a level of PFAS in their blood. That is concerning for a number of reasons. There's some pretty significant health impacts of PFAS. For children, it's interference with normal brain development. There's increased risks of certain types of cancer, kidney cancer, testicular cancer. It can cause fertility issues, immunosuppression issues. It can interfere with the impacts of vaccines, which in a post-COVID world is concerning, hormone disruption, and liver and thyroid issues. And as I mentioned, it's very persistent and bioaccumulative. They call it forever chemicals for a reason. That carbon-fluorine bond is so strong. It does last longer in human bodies than, say, bodies of animals. And part of the problem is we are exposed to it so much on a daily basis through all the products that we use that it never really gets a chance to flush out of our system. So you're looking at kind of an accumulation of it over time within your systems. And it's also many of you have probably seen the soil and water contamination stories across Maine, the farmland contamination that we're dealing with, leachate coming out of Juniper Ridge landfill that's impacting the Penobscot Nation by contaminating the river up there. Maine is dealing with a lot of issues around PFAS contamination. AFFF is just one of those. And so let's look at AFFF. And so AFFF stands for aqueous film forming foam. So it's a firefighting foam. It has been used for decades. One of the things that I remember as a child, and granted, I'm a little older, I'm in the Gen X time frame, but this is a thing that some fire departments used to spray and let kids go play in because it was, we didn't know the health impacts of it. And it was cool looking and the foam was fun for like kids to play around in. But what it is used for is to fight Class B fires. And these are flammable liquid fires. So like your oil tanker fires, those types of things. It's very good at what it does, and until very recently, it was required at the federal level by both the Department of the Defense and the Federal Aviation Administration because there were not good alternatives. The FAA, starting in 22, is starting to require a transition away from the use of AFFF, and legislation passed by the Biden and signed by the Biden administration as of 2023 is moving the Department of Defense away, so they will also no longer be using it. There are safer alternatives out there. Large airports such as Seattle Tacoma Airport have already transitioned away. Other areas are moving away from it. As I said, the Department of Defense, which was one of the last holdouts, has started to also move away from it. And one of the problems with, there are many problems with AFFF, but one of the impacts that we're seeing, firefighters have much higher rates of cancer due to exposure of PFAS and other toxics, in the AFFF foam, in their turnout gear. And so any type of product or use that we have with this AFFF impacts the health of the firefighters that are using it on a day-to-day basis. So while it does the job that it's supposed to do, the environmental and health impacts, particularly on our firefighters, the ones that we depend on to, save our life on a daily basis, are dealing with these higher impacts of higher rates of health impacts because of the cancers that are, or the toxics that are in the AFFF foam. So I'm sure, and I'm sorry, I also talk very fast, so yell at me if I'm talking too fast, but Maine has some legislation on the books around AFFF firefighting foam. Other states have also passed bans on AFFF. Maine did, take some really good steps back in 2021 to try to deal with the issue of AFFF foam. So in 2021, we passed LD 1505, which is an act to restrict the use of PFAS in firefighting foam. This was a bill that was led by Representative Lori Gramlich. Lori Gramlich has been an amazing champion on PFAS stuff. And so this was one of her bills. We passed a lot of PFAS bills in that session. It passed unanimously out of committee in both the House and the Senate. It went under the hammer. There was no debate. People understood that this was a necessary step to take to move away from, continued contamination of our land and water and bodies from a source of PFAS. So what LD 1505 did is it prohibits the use of AFFF in training. If you're looking around the state, Brunswick Landing was a Superfund site before this most recent spill, and part of that is because of the use of AFFF in the training for the military there. But Brunswick and that military site are not the only ones. Bangor Airport has used it. Any other military base, when they're doing training with this, they weren't at the time necessarily cleaning it up because we weren't aware of the impacts. So it ended up in a lot of our land and our soil and our, rivers, because of the training that they were doing. And it was one of the major sources, in fact, across the country, is one of the major sources of contamination of PFAS is because of AFFF firefighting foam. One of the lawsuits that the state of Maine currently has going around PFAS is around the AFFF contamination. And so this law prohibited the use of AFFF in training. It also prohibited the sale, manufacture, or distribution of AFFF foam. There was a caveat in there that said that a fire department or someplace that ended up using it in an emergency situation would not get in trouble for doing so, but they would be required to report to the DEP the discharge of it. And this is for any emergency use or just in general if something happened. Anybody is required to report to the department any sort of discharge of the AFFF foam so that the department can take steps to mitigate any possible contamination. We did have some language that was added that exempted oil terminals until 2025 because of requirements by the federal government, but also the Bath Iron Works needed to use it in some of the foam that was put into the ships that they built because it was still required by the Department of Defense. But those exemptions are expiring in 2025. And so the thing that we had hoped would help mitigate any sort of situations that happened in Brunswick was this language that we had in the bill that required manufacturers to recall any foam sold in the state by 2022. Well, if that language is in there, why did Brunswick Landing still have that foam on the base or on the former base? Well, what we found out was that as folks that had AFFF foam were reaching out to manufacturers that they had bought it from to try to get that try to get them to buy it back, a lot of those manufacturers had gone out of business, and so, or somebody else had bought the business, and so they weren't technically responsible for it anymore because they weren't the original manufacturer. And so there's all sorts of loopholes that some of these larger corporations do to get away from liability and all of that stuff. So while we had this really good language in there that would have helped mitigate what happened in Brunswick, what we were finding out is that manufacturers were not available to buy it back. And so a lot of the, places in the state that really wanted to do the right thing and get rid of it didn't have a venue to do that. We also didn't have a good handle on where in the state it still is. There was a PFAS task force in 2018, and part of that task force sent emails out to all the, fire departments and, private areas that might possibly have AFFF to find out who still had it, and didn't get a huge response rate. So even though we tried to do the right thing by requiring manufacturers to recall any of it, there wasn't anybody there to buy it back. And we also didn't have a good handle on where it is in the state. And so that kind of leads us to what happened in Brunswick and why we ended up with what we are. And so for that, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Ankeles, and he's going to dive more deeply into Brunswick specifically.
Hi, everybody. I'm just calling up my notes really quick so I can do this presentation some justice. Give me one moment here. Here we go. Um, okay. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Um, so I want to thank Maggie. I want to thank Sarah, Maine Conservation Voters, Defend Our Health, and I want to thank everyone who took the time to sign up to this, especially my constituents here in Brunswick who have been staying on top of this issue and pulling together to advocate for each other and our entire community in the face of some truly daunting obstacles. I'm Representative Dan Ankeles. I just started my second term 2 days ago, and my district includes all of the residential parts of the former Naval Air Base, among other things, and some surrounding communities north and west of the base. My colleague, who may or may not be on here, Cheryl Golick, represents Harpswell Cove itself and the neighborhoods east of the base, including multiple streets that are served by private well water. So before I get going, I just wanted to do a bit of constituent services here and direct the audience to the chat, where I would ask the moderators to throw up a link to a petition from a citizens group called Brunswick United for a Safe Environment, which calls on the Midcoast Regional Redevelopment Authority, which oversees these parcels where the spill happened, to assist affected residents with clean drinking water. So that link will also go out in the post-Zoom email and be part of the call to action today. So I'm honored to be presenting today, especially as there are so many people who are equally and more qualified to speak on this issue than I am. So if I mess something up or I can't smoothly answer your questions, we're lucky to have experienced scientists and environmental experts who are also on this webinar to provide more depth and perhaps back up my more broad language presentation. There's definitely going to be things I'm going to miss, so please make sure to make use of the chat if you need to add something. In the few minutes I have, I'm going to be mostly giving folks a sense of what happened, since people have varying levels of familiarity with the incident, what the response has been so far at both the state and local levels, what some of the obstacles have been, and what kind of policy responses we're looking at that are both specific to Brunswick and statewide. That is, how can we make sure that what happened in Brunswick doesn't happen elsewhere, and how can we make one of our state's worst environmental incidents in our history, something that we can use for the good of all of us. So I don't have a slide deck or anything, but I do have lots of notes, and I'm glad to discuss this with anyone offline after the lunch and learn. I am going to reference something that some folks have seen before. We had a forum shortly after the spill happened, and I had to do a very similar version of this to the entire town when very few of us knew what was going on. So just to recap, on Monday, August 19th, very early in the morning, the fire suppression system in Hangar 4 of the former Naval Air Base received a signal in error that someone had pulled a fire alarm. And when they reviewed the security footage, it showed that no alarm had been pulled, that it just sort of something went wrong, and it was convinced that that had happened. And what we ended up with was 1,450 gallons of AFFF foam mixed with 50,000 gallons of water were spilled into the hangar. And this was the worst spill of its kind that Maine has ever experienced, and among the worst nationwide. As Sarah said, this foam contains the PFAS family of chemicals, which are toxic to human and animal life, and they do not break down very easily. Foam contaminated the hangar. It got into the stormwater and the sewer systems. The foam that was in the stormwater system has, for the last few months, been flowing to nearby retention ponds and ultimately to Harpswell Cove. And the foam in the sewer system flowed into the section of the Androscoggin River near the Brunswick sewer department. And there are tests that are available to show that this actually did happen and that PFAS levels were significantly higher as a result of the spill. The good news, thank goodness, no nearby drinking water well fields for the water district were in use at the time of the spill. And the water district, as far as I know, is only using water from fields far enough away from the spill. So this is a precaution because the spill, hydrologically speaking, is outside of the district aquifer that serves the Jordan Avenue well field nearby the base. They're also constructing a large mitigation system that's being paid for by the Navy in that area to make sure that that well field will be safe for the foreseeable future. We've talked a lot at the local and state level about the hydrology of the area where Brunswick Landing is, and what we saw mostly, and this has remained true, was that the spill, when it went into the ground and into these retention ponds and the waterways, headed south southeast, and that direction lies Harpswell Cove. There's neighborhoods like the Coombs Road and Princess Point Road that have private wells, and those residents are among the most affected by this. So when this happened, one of the major obstacles that we encountered right away was a major communications gap where the redevelopment authority really struggled, and that's an understatement, to inform the public about what had actually happened and what people should do and how and why this happened and all of that. And so a bunch of us at the state and local level, we filled the gap. We, from day one, this became like a second full-time job for all of us, both town councilors and Senate President Maddie Daughtry, Representative Poppy Arford, Representative Cheryl Golick, and myself. We were just around the clock trying to keep people informed with newsletters, social media posts, public forums. We invited the commissioner of the Department of Environmental Protection to be a panelist on a forum. We had the state toxicologist for the Maine CDC help explain to people, could you still take a shower? Could you still take a walk? Was it safe for businesses to open? These were the questions that came up about Brunswick Landing right away, and the council, the town council, pretty quickly after that began to pass multi-part resolutions and follow-up resolutions demanding a lot of different pieces of information and actions from the Mid-Coast Regional Redevelopment Authority, which operates Hangar 4 but still does not own it yet. The Navy still owns it, but they do operate Hangars 5, 6, and 7, which also contain some of the AFFF. And so we kind of had a two-pronged approach in the immediate term, as both a state delegation and a local government delegation. It was, how do we do the initial cleanup and make sure people are informed about it, and how do we make sure this doesn't happen again? How do we identify where this is most likely to happen again and stop it? And we have coalesced as a government around Hangar 6, where not only does this stuff still exist, but inspection records show, and our fire department will confirm this, that there are major deficiencies with that hangar's fire suppression system. And you had Brunswick Area Citizens for a Safe Environment, which was an important group that was created when the former air base was shut down to make sure that the transition back to civilian life for all this land was done with as much environmental safety in mind as possible. They, with their testing ability, found that there was something coming out of Hangar 6, whether it's leakage or extra AFFF runoff from prior discharges. There was definitely higher levels of PFAS that were originating in Hangar 6. And so we've spent a lot of time as a state and local government trying to deal with the fact that this is still a major threat. Hangar 6, remember, is pointed directly at our Jordan Avenue well field. It can affect a lot more residences over and above what happened in the Hangar 4 spill. So some of the actions the council has pressured MIRA, or that's what we call the redevelopment authority, into making are doing a risk analysis, hiring a fire suppression consultant, exploring ways to get Hangar 6 shut down, or at least not shut down, but getting the fire suppression system inside Hangar 6 shut down. And so we're really focused on that hangar. It's been a real obstacle because the town doesn't really have any sort of ability to require MIRA to do anything. That's baked into the statute. I was going to get to obstacles. One of the biggest obstacles that we've all encountered is that MIRA actually is prevented from, or MIRA is very difficult to regulate because previous legislators kind of baked it into the statute that both the state and local government have little ability to tell MIRA what to do. So a lot of it has just been asking and pressure campaigns and meetings and meetings. And I have to really give credit to Brunswick's town council, particularly the chair, Abby King, who had many one-on-one meetings with the chair of the Mira board, to kind of drag them all kicking and screaming, to do some of this work. And to be fair to them, they have in the end begun to do some of the work, but I don't think a lot of it's been done at the pace we would like at this point. So one of the things that is going to be the job of state legislators is that we're going to have some kind of policy response at the legislative level, and we can only finally do that now because we had an election to actually get us back into office, and we now actually have a session ahead of us for a change. This happened in the summer when we had no ability to go in and actually develop legislative responses. What we did have was the ability to meet with the executive branch multiple times and begin to plan. And that's what we've done. We've had various meetings with both the DEP and the governor's policy advisors. And what I've come up with for myself so far, 3 to 4 different bills that I'll get into in just a second. And then at the local level, we have the opportunity to reshape the Mira board because there are 5 vacancies coming online for the Mira board. And so the town council has actually been, in its most recent couple meetings, working with the governor to put forward names to fill those vacancies. One critical thing that could really help us is that currently only 2 of the members of the Mira board are from Brunswick. I think with these vacancies, we'll be able to change that, and there'll be a lot more accountability. There'll be people on that board who are really focused on keeping our residents safe, and people who have really good experience managing large entities. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can accomplish and seeing if we can sort of rebuild the partnership between Brunswick and the Mira board, and Mira as an organization. Some of the bills I'm going to just switch over to a different piece of notes. I put these bills in weeks ago. They're now LR 100, LR 101, and LR 102. They aren't public documents yet, because they're still just working papers, so you can't find them on the legislative website. They do exist, and they will be published as soon as they're refined a little bit more. So it's a 3 to 4 pronged approach, depending on what's possible resource wise. The first bill is a statewide bill that is a much more rigorous approach to getting a statewide inventory of AFFF foam than what we've tried to do before. This is a requirement for any entity, both public and private, that possesses 5 or more gallons of AFFF, to provide that information to the fire marshal's office, the state fire marshal's office. And so this is something that I hope to get a little bit more concrete. I have a meeting on Monday with the DEP and the fire marshal's office, and hopefully we can get more of the details finalized. But my guess is that this is a sort of bill that would require one limited period full-time position. So the good news is, even in the state's financial crunch right now, this is an ask that's one-time money, which is always better than asking for ongoing funding that lasts for biennium after biennium. The next LR is LR 101. This is another statewide bill. it uses a legislative model that is based in New Hampshire, right? Uh, they have a take back program. So does Colorado. Um, there was a single company that stood up both states' take back programs. Um, and so the idea is that at the very least, we are able to have people opt in to provide this foam using various collection points, kind of like a hazardous waste collection day that you have all around the state. We're still figuring out where those collection points would be. We have some idea, but I don't want to throw another commissioner under the bus and get him on the hook just yet for something that he hasn't agreed to yet. So essentially, we would at least be able to collect these um, uh, sources of AFFF, provide good tracking documentation that is CERCLA compliant. CERCLA is I'm going to be very bad at the alphabet soup, but it is the major sort of federal list of the most hazardous chemicals. And once you're on that list, the federal government has some responsibility over those chemicals, and PFAS has recently been added to that list in a more meaningful way. And others can provide better detail on that. Um, One of the obstacles in talking to stakeholders for this bill that we're trying to still wrestle with is that originally there was a thought of using a new technology around the use of water to break down the PFAS bonds once you take them back. But as it turns out, this is the Ohio-based company that would have done this. It's basically given an allowance to discharge water into I think it's like the Cuyahoga River or something, and we would have just been poisoning somebody else's water source, and it would have created probably a major environmental and racial justice issue in Ohio, which is exactly the opposite of what we would have wanted to do. So at the very least, collecting it and getting it out of our towns is the plus, but we still have to navigate that obstacle of destruction because the technology really isn't there to do it in a clean way yet. There's dirtier ways to do it still, but the for example, the surface foam that was cleaned up when the DEP came to scrub the hangar, or not the DEP, but the Clean Harbors company that was hired by Mira and the DEP. They sent a lot of that foam off to Texas for incineration. That is not a clean way to do it, but it's one of the only ways we know at this point. Another obstacle is, how can we guarantee it's a way to legally transport AFFF as it is a hazardous material? What are the regulatory obstacles around transporting that? The third LR is very specific to Brunswick, LR 102. That is just very simply a directive within the MIRA statute that says you cannot have AFFF foam in any of the facilities that you own and operate. And that is sort of a direct rebuttal to what Mira has told us about uh, issues with businesses having to close if we tell them they can't have this stuff because of contractual obligations and federal regulations. My contention, and I think a lot of other people in town are very clear that we do not want this in Hangar 6 anymore. This poses a direct threat to our constituents, and we don't feel we can wait around. This is a mandate. It's not the kind of mandate that requires a 2/3 vote because Mira is not a town. So this is something I'm pretty convinced we're going to move forward with. We just don't want this foam in our community. Um, and some of I know my colleague, Representative Arford from Brunswick, also who represents Western Brunswick, has asked me, okay, but what if they don't comply? What's the enforcement mechanism? When does this have to be out by if it passes? Um, should there be a responsible party formally designated? Where do once we direct them to get rid of the foam, where do we keep it? How do we destroy it? Um, what how do we help the tenants of Hangar 6, um, who might be in trouble if they're out of compliance with federal regulations? So we have to work through a lot of that. Um, but it's very important that we at least get the ball rolling with all three of these. The fourth thing, which doesn't exist yet, but and I'll explain why in a second, is that we are struggling to figure out how we can help people affected by the spill who have had to install water filtration systems and who have had to do their own testing and who have had to buy their own drinking water. And how do we help the shellfish harvesters in the Harpswell Cove area who've lost value on their catch? By the way, the town is diligently tracking the value of the catch to see exactly how much our shell fishermen have lost in money because of this. So there are so many different things going on that we are trying to keep track of. President Daughtry will have legislation reforming the structure of MIRA itself, as we try to eventually begin the work toward phasing them out of existence, as most of their economic development work has been completed and most of the land they own has been sold off. And we also have the state, which is in a lawsuit with 3M. And I'm hopeful, and this is not a short term solution, that what we'll end up with is some kind of settlement fund to help address some of this stuff, similar to what we have with respect to the opiate settlement fund or the tobacco settlement fund. And then in the background, you have the EPA and the Navy kind of jostling with each other over who's ultimately responsible for coming in and dealing with this. And one thing we now have to factor in is this is President Biden's EPA and President Biden's Navy. And we now are dealing with the unpredictability of an administration change across party lines where there's a very different view of environmental regulation. And how will that affect what kind of responsibility the federal government takes for helping us? And how will the Supreme Court ruling in Chevron affect our ability to hold the federal government and private corporations responsible for what happened to us? And so there's so much going on. These pieces of legislation I have can't possibly solve all these problems, but we absolutely need them to pass. We absolutely need them to be funded. So I'm grateful that there's so many people on this Zoom that could potentially share their story and their opinion with our legislature when these public hearings start up as soon as late January. It could be that early, literally. So I want to thank everyone. I've talked for a long time, but I wanted to make sure I covered as much as I possibly could. And I'll open it up for the next speaker who's going to talk about call to action and then present some questions to all of us.
Thanks, Representative Ankeles. This is Sarah again, very quickly. Just wanted to mention for the CERCLA thing that Representative Ankeles mentioned, that's the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. The EPA did designate 2 PFAS, PFOA and PFOS under CERCLA, which will allows a few things like seek cost recovery, compel responsible parties to pay for response work. address releases without having to demonstrate imminent danger. There's a few things they could do under CERCLA. The one thing I will just mention is that PFOA and PFOS are in AFFF, but they are two of about 12 to 14,000 different PFAS chemicals, depending on what lists you're looking at, and more getting approved by the EPA every day. The federal government does not designate PFAS as a class. The state of Maine does. And so when we're looking at PFAS in Maine, we are looking at PFAS as a whole. So that is our definition of PFAS is very broad. It encompasses all of them. The federal government is doing a whack-a-mole way of dealing with PFAS, which is not the best way to do that. But at the very least, they do have those two PFAS designated under CERCLA, and that those two are two types of PFAS in AFFF. So that could possibly lead to some, looking at responsible parties and stuff like that. The responsible party here is probably the Navy, so that, that causes some problems. But anyway, Kathleen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Sarah, Representative Ankeles, we are so lucky to have you. There's so much that we learned in this last bit of time together, and I think for me, the top level piece is how grateful I am that we have such smart, dedicated, capable folks leading this work here in Maine, because it's a lot. There are a lot of initials, there are a lot of details, and there are a lot of scary elements of this. So thank you, thank you, thank you for everything you do to make it easy for us to understand and figure out what's going on and what it means for our health, for our communities and our environment, and what we can do about it. Speaking of what we can do about it, you will get an email later this afternoon with a link to this recording. I'm already thinking about watching it again and trying to make it all make sense. And a whole bunch of things that you can do to get involved. As Representative Ankeles said, the bills that will come before the legislature this year don't have LD numbers yet, so there's not an easy way for you to look them up yet, but there will be. So you can count on Defend Our Health and MCV and many of us to keep you involved and keep you up to date about when you're needed in Augusta to make your voices heard. There'll also be information about what you need to do to participate in public hearings when the time comes, petitions to sign, email lists to sign up for so you don't miss any important information. Sarah just dropped her email in the chat. She is a brilliant advocate. I encourage you to reach out to her and just ask her your questions. That's what I do on a daily basis. So join the club. And you'll also find in this afternoon's email some information about how you can share your story. One of the things that we have learned through this PFAS advocacy work is that the stories of real people being affected carry a ton of weight with our decision makers. So let us know what you're wrestling with and how it's hitting home for you. Having your voices and your stories present in the legislative debate means the world. So all of that will be there, and a way to support MCV as we think about the end of the year. So thank you for all of that. I can tell you we've got fabulous questions, and we're not going to get to even a small portion of them, but we'll do what we can. And I think I'll start with sort of the highest level piece. Uh, Brunswick's community response to this crisis is so inspiring. The stories that you just recounted for us, we had community members, environmental advocates, town officials, state legislators, state agency staffs. Seemed like everybody was playing a role. What worked? What didn't? And is there a lesson or a model here for how we can respond to other environmental threats? Because unfortunately, this isn't the only one.
Um, I would what worked was having the state delegation and local town staff and local elected officials stay in close communication with one another and be on the same page. Having that, you know, constant, um, like every day there was another meeting or phone call where we would get aligned, where we would figure out what we didn't know, what we needed to know. We would figure out where there were information gaps that our constituents were experiencing. And so just having that level of coordination, from people, that helped us do the work.
Thank you for doing that. I know that kind of coordination doesn't just happen. So thank you for being so diligent about connecting. Sarah, you look like you're thinking about something.
Well, just also to flag, as Representative Ankeles mentioned, there's a community group on the ground there in Brunswick, and they've been doing amazing work, and they're still doing amazing work. Aside from that petition, Defend has been working with Slingshot in Brunswick and with that community group to help organize folks on the ground. So there's the coordination from the folks that are, from Mira, from Representative Ankeles, from the town council members, from Senate President Maggie Daughtry, all of those folks making sure that the policies and stuff is moving forward, and they're hearing from the community. But there's also the community folks on the ground too that are doing a good job of going and reaching out to their neighbors and hearing concerns and stuff like that. So there's kind of a two-pronged attack there, which I think is working pretty well. So
Amazing. We're going to zoom in now to the individual level, because while we're pursuing policy solutions and technological solutions, as individuals, we're worried. So what can we as individuals be doing to reduce our exposure to PFAS while those longer term solutions are being developed? And specifically, I know there are plenty of people who will offer to sell us PFAS testing kits. Do we trust them? Do they work for everything? What should we be looking for? And how do we know that the ways we're trying to protect ourselves are working and not just,
yeah.
addressing?
And Representative Ankeles, if you have suggestions, also please feel free to jump in. But in terms of protecting yourself from your daily life, it's one of those things that's really hard to shop your way out of. And quite frankly, it should not be your responsibility. The products that you're buying should be safe. You should not have to worry about the fact that there's a toxic chemical in the product that you're buying that could give you cancer. It's ludicrous that we have to worry about that. It's ludicrous the way that our system is set up to approve chemicals and products. But there are a couple of things that you can do. Nonstick pans, get rid of them. Ceramic, cast iron, stainless steel are very good, viable ways of cooking your food. And do not generally have PFAS in them. Anything that's if you wear makeup, like I wear makeup, don't buy anything that's waterproof. Dental floss weirdly has PFAS in it. And so don't get the stuff that's Glide or that type of stuff. Get the more hippie versions of dental floss that are not coated with stuff, because you're putting that directly in your mouth. But the other good thing is that Maine passed a law, one of the first in the nation, one of the strongest in the nation, that will require most products sold in the state of Maine by 2026 be PFAS free. This is not everything, but it's most of the consumer facing stuff, like your cookware, like your dental floss. Industry has been trying to weaken that law every year, and I'm sure they will be back again this year asking for exemptions. Apparently, the cookware people think it's totally fine to continue to use it and have been arguing in other states that they should still be allowed to put toxic chemicals and stuff you cook your food on. And so I'm sure we will see some of that. In terms of the drinking water test, there are a couple out there. There's a Cyclopure one that's $80. And there are a couple, I will say, out there that people are kind of selling. I will say you want to be very like most of them work to a certain extent, but the problem with some of those easier ones is they don't have you take precautions for cross-contamination. Because PFAS is in so much stuff, it's so easy to cross-contaminate when you're testing your drinking water. And so if you're talking to the DEP is very specific about the types of tests that they want in terms of proof, for lack of a better word, that you have PFAS in your drinking water. And that's because the tests that the DP has certified take into account the cross-contamination and all of that type of stuff. So, so I'm not saying those tests are bad or don't work. And if you just want to get a general idea and don't want to spend the $300, the $80 Cyclopure is like a good thing to be like, do I have it or not? But if you do come back with detection, I would, if at all possible and financially feasible, spring for the more expensive one to test. Defend can also help. Sometimes we can get discounts on the more expensive ones. And so like, also feel free to reach out to us and we can help you through that process. So.
Does the state have resources to help with testing as well?
Not for PFAS. They do for other contaminants. We have a piece of legislation. We're trying to get the state to cover the cost of PFAS well water testing for low-income Mainers. We'll have a fiscal note on it, which will make it harder. The thing is, if you do test your water and it does come back and you're within that low-income criteria, they will pay for remediation. They just won't pay for testing. Maine Housing Authority has a fund that if your drinking water is contaminated and you are within that kind of their low-income threshold, they will help you pay for remediation. We just are not there weirdly with the testing yet, but if your well is contaminated because of the land application of sludge, then the DEP will work with you to either, refund you or cover the cost of a test, but you have to be able to show that the contamination is from the land application of sludge. So
I want to just jump in because like one of the obstacles, one of the most confusing parts of this is that like you have the state talking about the hydrology of the spill, saying actually it can't go to some of these residents, but then some of the residents are testing positive, and that's a concern. You have a state standard that's different from the federal standard. You have legacy chemicals that were probably there before the spill because these, they have been training with this stuff and for years and years, and they've been, on top of all the firefighting, they've been exploding ordnance all over the place. There's, they've been fueling their planes and who knows what else. There are, this stuff gets into septic systems and just because of like it accumulates in our everyday products. There's so many confusing ways that PFAS can begin to build up and even get into people's leaching fields. I mean, it's sorting out liability and what time period a chemical came from because it never breaks down. So you can't measure like how old it is because there's no way to track the breakdown. It is causing my constituents and Cheryl's constituents real headaches. And so being able to, my inclination is that we need a kind of a broad-based peace of mind approach to funding reimbursement for these people because you're never going to be able to figure out which well was legacy and which well was the spill and or if none of them, even if none of them were the spill, but it's all been just poisoned over time. You're never going to get the Navy to figure to come to terms with this. And so this is where state and local governments have to step up. And I think the local, Brunswick as a local government, they're thinking of setting up their own fund. But we can't put property taxpayers on the hook for this stuff. It's just not acceptable. So if the state has to backfill something while we wait for some settlement money or reimbursement from the feds to come in, I think that's the just thing to do. It's just for my constituents. It's just for Cheryl's constituents. So that's the approach I hope the state takes.
Couldn't agree with Representative Ankeles anymore. So,
just so grateful that we have such good problem solving happening here, and you could count on all of us to be right there with you through this process. thanks to everybody who joined today. Really, really appreciate your engagement both today and throughout the year. Keep an eye out for that email this afternoon with lots of follow-up information on this program and information about how to support future programs as well. We had so many questions that we didn't get to today, but never fear. Maggie has done a masterful job of just organizing them, and we are going to share them with Sarah and Representative Ankeles after the program, and we'll find a way to get answers to all of you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
Thank
To be
you.
continued.